Hello, everyone. Welcome back to X-Rays, where we take a look at industry evolution through the eyes of those creating change and innovation. I'll be your host, Rosalie, for this online show where we'll discuss and learn the latest, most exciting developments from industry leaders, pioneers, and innovators who are shaping the future. Today, we'll be speaking with Greg DeShields. He is the Executive Director of Greg DeShields Consulting, where he delivers consulting on inclusive leadership, DEI strategy, and organizational culture transformation for clients in the nonprofit, education, and corporate sectors. Greg is an experienced professional, having previously worked as the Executive Director at Tourism Diversity Matters. So without further ado, let us welcome our guest. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for that great introduction. And I look forward to our conversation today.
Yes, me too. I think we've got a really interesting conversation ahead of us. So you recently launched a podcast, and I'd be interested to know what originally motivated you to launch Something to Say, and how did you identify the kind of stories and conversations you wanted the podcast to amplify?
Sure. So the podcast is a great niche addition to the work that we do at GregDeShieldsConsulting.com. It is a way for us to engage with leaders in discussions about passion. The primary focus of the podcast is to talk to everyone from a CEO to a coordinator in an office about how passion plays an important part in their lives and in the work that they do. We get some incredible stories of transformation and what the true impact is and what it can mean for listeners in terms of how they take the passion that they have and apply it to what they would like to accomplish. I like to tell the one story of the one woman who was a noted keynote speaker who was celebrating her anniversary with her husband when in the redwood forest in California, a 7,000-pound tree fell on her, which certainly left her immobile and put her through the most challenges of life. However, through passion, commitment to her personal life and her professional life, she's back on stage. She's
Mm,
not just on stage in the way that she had been in the past, but she represents that disabled community. And I think that's really the essence of the podcast.
absolutely. And as a host, how do you prepare for each interview to ensure your guests feel heard while still delivering a compelling narrative for your listeners?
Well, we certainly try to ensure that we are engaged in conversations with individuals who love to talk. So it
Mm,
begins there. Once we really engage in conversation, we follow a scripted format. So for each episode that an individual will listen to, they are fortunate enough to get some consistency and continuity in terms of how the questions are answered by these various different individuals. But as you start to begin to unpack it, you see, even though there's a lot of consistency, there's a lot of uniqueness to the stories that everyone tells. I think the most important part of the podcast at the very end is we ask everyone the same question: what do you have to say?
mm,
And without any surprise, what we found, the more consistent message has been very positive affirmations about how we as society should work better together, how we as a society should pull in the same direction, and just generally as a society, how we should just all get along. So that part of the podcast is the most enjoyable, but allows for that consistent model that we've used to be very effective.
I can imagine. And what makes for a great podcast episode in your eyes? What elements do you think have to be present for you to say, yeah, this conversation is going to resonate?
Well, the person to be a talker to start with,
Yeah.
and that you don't lose airtime with someone who has very little to say, or maybe not have the ability to talk in a very clear way.
Mm,
Beyond that, though, we look for individuals who are very energetic, who are thought leaders, who can bring insights to the podcast, which are very clear, and that they are able to give us doable things, measurable things,
mm,
things that people can walk away and say, wow, I'm glad I really listened to that. And also, I will say post production is everything.
mm,
We have certainly found with our partner, Mohammed Adnan, who actually is in Pakistan, who does all of our post production. That is also how you package it. Not every part of the conversation is something that you would want to distribute. But if someone is very skilled and talented and can pull the salient points out, it creates an interesting and valuable podcast.
I can absolutely imagine. I'm sure you've listened to so many interesting stories. You've really heard from a variety of people, which is not only a great experience to have, but it's also part of storytelling. This is it's podcasting has become an essential storytelling
Mhm.
platform in today's society. Especially for underrepresented voices. So could you tell us about how you
Mhm.
leverage your show to elevate perspectives that don't often make it into mainstream media?
I was recently interviewed by another podcaster who talked a lot about the idea of how do you get someone's voice in a room that it wouldn't normally be in. And a podcast can do that. Sometimes it's directly from people listening, but it can also be someone who heard that interview and decides that they want to share it.
Mm,
So I think that's an important part of how you are able to leverage it for those who have a voice that wouldn't necessarily want to be heard. Podcasting has become such a valuable tool in how companies are able to maintain a consistent message, help to elevate their voice, get their voice out, and for those who you are interviewing, provide them that unique service for them to provide their most authentic perspective about topics in a way that can be most quite impactful. And certainly we hope that can help their business. But if anything, it can improve the way that people perceive their brand because as you know, it is storytelling. It's
mm,
unfiltered. It's about as authentic and genuine as you can be. And I think that's amongst the reason why for us, the podcast has been so popular. We were nominated Best Podcasts in Philadelphia before
wow,
our end results, but
congratulations.
it's exciting to know that we're able to do that. Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, could you tell us a bit more about that? About the fact that, sorry, you were saying about being nominated.
Yeah, it's a real surprise for us to have received the nomination. We are in our second season, but we were excited that the stories that we tell are just that unique, especially when you enter into a field that is really heavily dominated with a variety of different voices. I think for us, what is unique about us is how authentic we are. We try not to manufacture it. Obviously, we do some post production, but the stories are the stories themselves and we get some of the greatest perspectives from individuals. And they also give you a little bit of insight about who they are. One of the questions we ask is if you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would that be? And we get a variety of different perspectives, but there are a number of people who'll say Jesus, which is kind of an interesting way to start a conversation. But those are some of the things that I think contributed to us. I should also say that on January 5th, we'll be launching a spin-off podcast. It's a great collaboration to talk about the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States. And that podcast is called A250 Plus. And we're
Mm.
working with another podcasting group to really expand the work that we do. So that's one of the reasons why I think it led to the nomination. I think we'll certainly be worthy of it, and we should definitely win it. But that's some of the ways that we have been able to leverage it.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to go a bit more into this podcast that you're launching and really understand how your past experiences has helped you in launching it. What has the podcasting process taught you about building a brand through audio, and how does it shape the direction of your upcoming projects?
Well, it certainly is about consistency. It is about having attention to detail. We wanted to dig deep into the branding perspective of it to make sure that there was some familiarity with what they saw in terms of image. We're on two major platforms here in the United States. We're on one called RSS.com, which does distribution across all different channels, which for us is fantastic. And then we're also an affiliate of the Alive Podcast Network, which is a network of Black storytellers. We represent a large representation of storytellers with very unique stories. And that branding has been fantastic.
Mm.
I do think, though, when I launched it, especially from my previous experience, that I knew that it was about the details, coming up with a name that really was something that was relevant to the podcast itself, coming up with a model in terms of the branding that would be very consistent for people as they were able to view any of the materials that we produce. And then, of course, to leverage it by having its own individual website so that we could constantly update it with images of not just previous seasons, but also adding images of upcoming interviews. And
Mm.
then leveraging each one of the persons who you are interviewing in a way that you have YouTube components of it so people can look at video and have direct link that takes them directly to the actual audio portion of it as well. I think all of those different things in combination makes a big difference. Of course, you always want to be on other podcasts. So by being on other podcasts, you get to swap out stories of your experience and theirs. There's a show that I've participated on, which is called A Live Prompt. We get a prompt from the producers and myself and another podcaster. we interview each other about our podcast and that particular subject. It's shown live here on Prime TV, Apple TV. So you get all of these different expanded components. But I would say, as in the case of any business, you look heavily at how you're able to leverage the visibility of it to grow your audience, grow your product awareness, and make a difference. I think the key thing is also monitoring what the cost is in order to do it. For a lot of people, it's not just getting a microphone that makes a difference, it's how you also look at a business and make an investment. Mindful that a rate of return on a podcast is not as easy as selling widgets. So for us, you want to carefully select sponsors that are going to advertise on it and hopefully not in any way take away from the quality of the experience.
Absolutely. I can imagine. Well, it sounds like you have a wealth of experience in this area as well, and are really using it to grow your podcast, but also, give opportunities to people to talk about their experiences and to share that with the world, which is always incredibly valuable and interesting to do. So thank you so much for talking to us today, Greg. It was really interesting to hear all about your work and your podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate it.
Of course. And to our listeners at X-Rays, thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Rosalie, and I'll see you next time.